All right, here we go. Project Herpetoculture podcast. This is episode 14, and we have a fantastic guest today. But before we introduce him, I want to do a quick bit of housekeeping, acknowledge our sponsor, which is Custom Reptile Habitats. We have an affiliate link posted in the show notes and YouTube description. If you make a purchase through that link, we'll get a little kickback. That'll help us. I also want to mention Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting us.
The GOAT.
The GOAT. Yep. And also just want to give a quick shout out to some of the other podcasts on the network. We've got the Animals Everywhere podcast with Bryce Broom, Animals at Home with Dylan himself, and then Reptiles and Research with Liam Sinclair and Ellie Hills. They've been killing it, putting out some amazing episodes lately. So give those guys a shout. Check them out if you can. And yeah, we also have a Patreon now. So you can find a link to that in, again, the show notes, YouTube description, all that. We're really trying to grow our capacity with this show, and that'll really help us do it. So yeah, with all that being said, I'll pass it to Phil to introduce our guest.
All right. Awesome. So our guest today is the one and only Frank Payne. Frankie, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with us, dude. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, awesome to be here. Big fan of the show already. I haven't listened to every episode, but I've listened to quite a few. And I feel pretty honored to be amongst that caliber that you've had on your show so far.
Oh, hey, well, it's the hard work you're putting in over there, man. It's can't go unnoticed. You're doing great stuff. So the question we wanted to kind of lead off the conversation with is, can you talk a little bit about who or what have been some of your inspirations over the years within Herpet? So that can be either people or figures or movements directly within herpetoculture, or that can also include stuff that's perhaps outside of herpetoculture, but that influences how you do what you do and how you think about what you do.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'll start kind of back, pretty far back. So I've always been, like everybody that's probably listening to this, just always been obsessed with reptiles and amphibians and wildlife and nature in general, but specifically reptiles and lizards mostly. And probably my number one original inspiration and guiding force in herpetoculture has been my mom, because she was so very supportive of my crazy obsession for forever. Right. Some parents try to mold you into their desires and their passions, and other parents, go along with you on your journey and help you to achieve that. And that's how she was. She was the latter. So this was, 30 years ago, where reptile shows were not like every weekend within a tri-state area. They're few and far between. So whenever there was one, we would drive hours and hours. Whenever we did take a vacation, it was quite often either based around a herping trip or a reptile show. The first time that we went to California was for the San Diego IRBA, which at the time was like the biggest one. It was like pre-Tinley and that. So it was like Mecca for me. And just, we had a spare bathroom in our home, and that became my reptile room growing up through middle school and high school. And it just, got fuller and fuller of reptiles. And she was just so supportive of that. It was always, hey, as long as you are working for it, you are paying for the feeders with your allowance and your jobs, and you're putting in the time and effort, then all of that is okay. Every single zoo within driving distance and beyond we would go to. So just that. And then, when I was younger, we didn't have, it got better and better as time gone on. But when I was younger, we didn't have very much money. But the one thing that was never denied to me was a book. It could be an expensive book and my mom would make it work. Right. So I had a lot of good reptile books growing up, it didn't necessarily, get to do, have a nice bike and things like that. But if there was a new reptile book or a special reptile book that I really wanted, I got it. So that was always, I attribute a lot to that. So that's number one that kind of got me going and set me on the path. When it comes to people or resources kind of in herpetoculture, so number one has to be Philippe de Beaujolais for me. I'm sure, everyone that's been in this for a long time knows who he is. And if you don't know who he is, you owe more to them than you think you do, especially if you're into lizards. But honestly, most of herpetoculture, you know, in terms of American authors, he was it in terms of publication and educational materials for herpetoculture, not just herpetology, but herpetoculture itself. So he was, other people, idolize sports figures and musicians. I idolize Philippe de Beaujolais.
Sure, sure.
And then, also, in terms of non-American people, Henkel and Schmidt put out the best publications, like through TFH, like back in the day too. Their chameleon books were instrumental in me, becoming so into chameleons. And then also the CIN, the Chameleon Information Network, from back in the day, back in the 90s. They were by far ahead of their time, and an incredible publication and network of chameleon keepers. And I got started through there, and I met a lot of people through the CIN, because it was like the old school, like it was a quarterly publication. In the back, it had a list of all the chameleon keepers that were members, the species that they kept, the state that they lived in. Wow. And if they so chose, their email address and phone number. And I met a lot of, incredible people through there. The first chameleon guy that I met, probably most people have never, in herpetoculture, have never heard of, is Rebello, or Rob Bertoni. He was a police officer for Fish and Game, but he was a big chameleon guy. He actually wrote the first panther chameleon breeding article in the old school Reptiles and Amphibians magazine. You guys remember those? They were smaller, but wonderful publications. He wrote the panther chameleon thing with, in that. He is the person I got my first captive bred chameleon from. I met him when I was 12, and like, he's been a mentor to me ever since. And, I meet him at the Hamburg Reptile Show every now and again. So like, still today, pushing 30 years later, almost, we still talk and that. So just, I would say that those would be my main inspirations, growing up and developing in herpetoculture.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's really cool that you gave credit to your mom, because I feel like I have long overlooked her, because for me personally too, because she was always so supportive of everything I wanted to do with this, and even when others were not, or when moms are such champions, right? That's fantastic.
Yeah, champions for their children. Yeah, it's such a great way to say it.
I
absolutely.
totally relate to that as well.
Yeah.
I put
that's great.
My poor mom through hell as a teenager with a bunch of big old colubrids in the back room that she was terrified of, but she let it happen. She knew it was important to me. So
yeah,
that's great.
Totally. So then, can you talk a little bit about how this might be a little bit broad for this early on, but I'm gonna go for it anyway. So let's say if you took the last let's say 5 years of your practice, are there major ways that the way you're thinking about what you do has evolved in, say, the last 5, if not the last 5, maybe the last like 8 to 10?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I don't want to put like a number on it because I'm not very good with years and timekeeping and things like that. But let's say 5 years ish is when what has always been a hobby and a personal interest, a personal obsession, but just a hobby, started to transform into a business, into something that I started to realize and think about from an entrepreneurial point of view. And it all started with one species, the electric blue gecko, Lygodactylus williamsi. From the first time I saw them, the zoo that I worked at, we had a couple of them and was just obsessed. As you guys probably know, like blue is pretty much that type of blue is the rarest color in the animal kingdom. And maybe a scientist can correct me, but I'm pretty sure I read that. And I was just blown away by them. So I got a couple, I loved them to death, was going really well. They bred, I held some back, I got a few more, and all of a sudden I have like 5-6 pairs, and if they're like really cranking, they can lay like 2 eggs every 2 weeks, right? Think of them like a Knowles, like peak efficiency is like 1 egg a week on average. And that's not always the case, but they can really crank them out when they get going. So that was going really well. Loved them, kept expanding. And then they were quite rare and still fairly are at this point. Then I started to sell them. and people, I couldn't produce enough of them, when things were much smaller scale. I only had like 4 or 5 pairs of Williamside, that was still like, was cranking out like maybe 4 eggs a week, let's say, so a good number of geckos for, a hobbyist. And then they were selling really well. And then like, just for whatever reason, it just like clicked, like, what, like I'm actually starting to bring in more money than I'm spending, which is literally hasn't happened in the past 20 years. And in my hobby, you know what I mean? Like it's going to take me forever to get out of the red, actually, based on how much I've spent over my life. But like, I started to realize like this might actually be profitable. This might actually be something that I can do, that I can love, but might actually help to, if not pay the bills, then at least supplement the bills and maybe some fun money. And, I can expand my hobby even more. I can get even more lizards that I like. And so then that happened with that species. And then another species I was working with, carpet chameleons, first lateralis, that I became obsessed with them. And the same thing started to happen. I just started with a pair or two, and then they started to do really well. And people really liked them and they sold well. And then it just kept kind of going from there. And then it just kind of just, without really intending it, kind of shifted more and more towards a business. And then little by little, my mind, my point of view started to change. Like, okay, I'm not just going to buy the rarest, coolest lizard that I can afford. It started to be like, okay, how does this fit into herpetoculture? Can I produce this animal and get it into other people's hands? Do people want it? Is it something that others will be passionate about? So that's been kind of my big shift, is going just from a hobby to, and I don't necessarily want to say like a business, but from a hobby to something more entrepreneurial, something that does have a financial component to it. And I just making decisions that include that. So my decisions that I make these days, they're not solely based on money, because I think, especially when you're talking about with living animals, you're going to get yourself into trouble very quickly if you're only thinking about it from a business point of view, from a dollars and cents point of view. So I do take into account, can I sell these animals, for what I think that they're worth? Will other people want as many as I produce? Is there a space for them in the hobby? Is the market flooded with them? So those things do enter my mind every time I consider a new species. But number one has to be, am I passionate about this species? Am I excited about it? Like, when I look at it and hold it in my hands, or look at it through an enclosure window pane, does it make me excited? Does it make me feel like a little kid? If it doesn't, if the answer is no to those things, then I don't work with the animal. Because like, I have very rare stuff, but then I also have, I have 4 crested geckos, because I love them, because they're awesome. Like I still look at some of these crested geckos sometimes up close, not just a picture, and I'm like, my God, what an unbelievable animal. Like they're just insane. They're incredible looking. Like if they weren't, like, could you imagine, like if crested geckos weren't so prolific and so hardy, they would be like one of the most sought after like reptiles, like that nerds would be into, you know what I mean? Not just like pet keepers, but like nerds like us would be all over them if they, weren't so common and so very, very easy to keep. Like they aren't a challenge at all. But my God, they're just an interesting animal. So I do have a handful of them just because I like them, and they do sell, right? So that part also ticks off too. People, they're a very popular pet reptile. But I'm also not going to have a room full of crested geckos though either.
Yeah, sure.
Try finding that balance.
Yeah.
Right.
So with some of that in mind, one of the other things we wanted to ask you, which you answered some of that already, but maybe we can get you to unpack a little bit more what some of the criterion are for you that cause you to say, all right, I'm gonna dive in, I'm gonna work with this species. And then conversely, what are some of the things that might cause you to say, I'm cutting this project, I'm not doing this anymore?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do think about those things. I make those decisions, those exact ones. So in order for me to really want to work with the species and to do like a deep dive into it. So like I have a handful of crested geckos, but that's not something I'm doing a deep dive into. It does have very specific criteria that it has to meet. So one, it has to be small or relatively small. I have a limited amount of space, and I do look at things from it's a double-edged sword, one that's very altruistic and one that's not at all. But from the altruistic side of things, I can provide in my limited space and resources, a much better habitat and home for a smaller animal than I can for a larger animal. So that's like the altruistic side, which is very important to me. But then the other side of things is the business side of things, where I literally do a square foot cost analysis. How much money will X square feet of this animal bring in versus another one, right? So if you think about it, you have a limited space, and if you can keep, Williams side, they're so small, right? They're this big, they're 3 inches long with the tail, so they're extremely small animals. I could keep 12 of them, 6 pairs in by comparison huge enclosures on a 4-foot space, right? So I have 6 pairs easily. Now compare that to let's say bearded dragons, for instance, which are like 100 times the size of the Williams side, right? If I were to keep them in like, so one, if you wanted to keep them in comparably sized enclosures, you couldn't even keep them in a 4-foot wall, because like, a 2-foot lizard in a 4-foot enclosure, that's not great. It's kind of the standard of things, but that's not the way I like to do things. So I will literally, even if they both sell equally well for the same amount of money, I will make less money in that square foot for, whatever square foot of space. So it is, I do approach it from both points of view, in that, what's best for the animal and what's best for me financially. And smaller species check both of those boxes. Right. I can make more money per space, and I can give them better lives. So like win-win as far as I'm concerned. I think, I'm starting to do this more and more. And I think that we as an industry really need to start pushing for smaller species of reptiles. Like, I do think that there's a place and an appropriate way to keep large species of reptile, but I do think that the vast majority of reptile keepers would be better served keeping smaller and more moderately sized reptiles. If we could focus on that as an industry more, I think that would be just wonderful. And the other thing too that I really have to, that I take into account of whether I'm going to work with the species or not is the market flooded? As a business person, I do, like, some people thrive in a crowded marketplace. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I don't want to be in a crowded marketplace at all. I want to be doing something different. I want to carve out my own niche, right? I don't want to like try to fight my way to the top of this established pile, right? I want to carve out my own niche. I want to set myself apart. So it has to be a species that is not super common, that is not, the marketplace is, from my perspective anyway, looking in, not flooded. So I definitely make sure that that's the case. And then you need to consider is like, there are plenty of really cool reptiles out there that people like myself or you, like reptile nerds, might think are super cool and interesting, but is it palatable to a larger industry, to a larger cross section of pet keepers? Totally. Right? If it's not, then maybe that's not a great species to work with. And and if quite frankly, if it's not colorful, it's probably not going to sell very well. And it's the sad state of things. It has to have something to set it apart from other things. And as much as I love a lot of cool small brown lizards, there's not a huge space for that in the industry, and there just never will be. It doesn't mean like that people shouldn't keep them, and I think that's awesome, but like from a business point of view, it's just not a real smart decision. So I do have to limit myself, and I just need to make sure that if I am working with anything like that it's on a smaller scale.
Yeah. And there's definitely something. Sorry, go ahead, Roy.
Oh no, I was just going to say all really insightful considerations there.
Yeah. There's also something to be said about like how to, I think people forget that you can genuinely generate interest for something, so something that maybe people don't see that much of. Exactly. It really just takes one, maybe two people, sometimes just one, really, to show them in the right light, show them having success with that animal, show them, the interesting quirks of what that animal can and can't do. I've been making changes here, sort of making similar considerations because, I most of the lizards I have are, medium to small, but I do have my Egyptians, the Egyptian
Mhm.
Euros, which are massive and like they're still growing. I mean, Pork Chop, the male, he's a fucking monster. He just keeps cranking along, and him and Boulder, the female, I mean, they're gonna be here forever. Whether I die first,
Yeah.
they're gonna be here. But I have been making I've basically decided that next year I'm not gonna breed them at all. And then I don't
Mm,
know when I'm going to breed them again at this point. And it's not
yeah.
that I definitely will, like I will at some point, but
Mhm.
it's like I'm just going to be way more selective about when and when I get those babies, where they go. Because
Yep.
I mean, the reality is, other than just one or two other people who I know who are trying to breed their Egyptians, and then a handful of people who have bought babies from me, I can't really think of people. I can't think of a lot of people who are doing those animals justice. They're so big. They're
Yeah.
so damn big.
Hmm.
And then sort of, on the other side of it, the Xenogama Taylori have been a little project that I've been pushing because I think they fit that bill as well. That maybe
Yep.
they are the more brown lizard for now. I think a little bit of, just a little bit of phenotypic refinement.
Hmm.
And those wild little
Mhm.
tails and the males with the blue throats. I mean, I think they are perfect for the industry in that regard.
They have to have
Mhm.
something. It doesn't necessarily have to be color, but it has to have something. And like they have
Yeah.
that crazy tail.
Yeah.
You know, what I mean,
Yeah.
that sets them apart. And the fact that, for at least part of the year, those males have insane blue throats.
Yeah.
So like that sets them apart. But yeah, that really, and like what you said about a couple of minutes ago really resonated with me. Is like what I try to do is people don't realize that if you're good at what you do, and if you're passionate about what you're doing, and you're articulate enough, you can be the one to generate interest in the species,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So like if I can pride myself a little bit, like I did that for electric blue geckos in this country, right? I
Mhm.
Yeah.
took them from a very niche, like everybody liked them, but not that many people took them seriously as a breeding project, and I I took I took the value of that animal from about $75 for a baby to $300 for a baby. And I did the
Mhm.
same thing with carpet chameleons. Carpet chameleons were, being bred in small numbers. And again, I took, based on my educational stuff and my social media stuff, took the interest in that from being non-existent to being like, I can't possibly begin to keep up with the demand on my own. And the same thing,
Mhm.
I'm trying to do the same thing with jeweled lacertas, and
Yeah.
we'll do the same thing for a couple other lacerta things that I have in the pipeline. Like just stuff like that. Like if you care enough about it, and if you are good enough at what you're doing and articulate enough and are willing to share and take the time, like you can be the one to create um demand for something different in this industry.
Yeah.
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 Totally.
Absolutely. Roy, again, I can just talk forever and ever. I want to give you a little bit of room.
Well, okay, so I'm kind of curious, Frank, to pick your brain a little bit about like kind of more husbandry related stuff.
Of course.
And
Sure.
I mean, obviously, you have been an innovator in establishing some species that are not well established in the hobby up to this point. And so I'm curious with these like lesser known species, how do you go about forming your care protocols? How do you
Mhm.
approach that? And are there like overarching concepts that you use when you're like responding to your animals and what they're telling you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a zookeeper, before I did this as a business. And when I was doing it before that, when I was younger, I always had like such varied interests. Now it'll mostly stem around lizards, but like it was still quite varied. And one of the things that I learned, about reptiles is like you can have overarching philosophies and protocols that work for many different species,
Mhm.
right? You just kind of have to maybe tweak things a little bit. Like for instance, I'm such a big believer. Like there's a couple of things that I think that I use for everything that I think help me to be successful is, I believe in seasonal variation, because
Mhm.
like, the vast majority of the animals we're working with experience seasonal variation, even if it's just a wet and a dry season. But a lot of them experience temperature variation and, and light variation, seasonally. They have circadian rhythms, and it's a mistake to not follow those things. They have temperature rhythms to follow. It shouldn't just be this, like you shouldn't just, sometimes people believe they'll heat a room to X temperature, and that's what the animals are kept at. And that can work, but that's like far from natural. And that can work for like very like hardy and easy species, like let's say ball pythons. But you can't just heat a room to a certain temperature and then expect chameleons and different geckos and probably uromastyx and definitely not lacertas to breed and to be healthy. Like they won't last very long. So seasonal variation is just so important. High quality water, and my animals don't get tap water. I don't believe in using, like, maybe you have like some of the best tap water in the world, but like I've always used reverse osmosis water for like 20 years plus, and a lot of people are doing that more now, like whether it's a dart frog or whether it's a blue tongue skink, they get high quality water. They don't just get water from the tap. I gut loading insects, I don't give my insects have never gotten dry gut load. I don't really like it. It can work. I don't believe in that. They get fresh fruits and vegetables and greens, and protein sources and things like that. Hydration is so important. I think that so many people, it's like hydration, I think, is probably the most important aspect of reptile keeping. And I don't think that people pay enough attention to it. Not like beyond like putting a water ball in a tank. So for instance, an example of that being, I have automatic misting systems on practically all of my enclosures. And so like these enclosures that you see behind me, on the bottom levels are more tropical, or semi-tropical, the Williamsi, other species of leaf-tailed geckos. So it's like, and I have it like by temperature gradation all the way at the bottom of our leaf-tailed geckos because it's cooler on the bottom of the room. My Williamsi are in the middle because they like it warmer, but not blazing hot. And then at the top are my desert species that like very high daytime temperatures. But the thing about them, so like I pay attention, you have to think about things like that, right? It would be pretty dumb of me to put my leaf tails up here and my toad-headed agamas and my lacertas down here. And then, so anyway, so all of them are on an automatic misting system, right? Because I have hundreds of, including baby enclosures, I have hundreds of terrariums right now. And I call them terrariums because like most of them are bioactive or naturalistic, whatever you want to call it. But they're all on misting systems, everyone, even the desert ones. And what's funny is like my desert animals get misted for the same duration and frequency just because it's all on the same timer. The difference is that those animals are kept at a higher temperature with basking lights. So it burns that humidity off a lot quicker, but then they're still getting ample opportunity to hydrate and to drink. We tend to think like, all right, they're from a desert, so it's like hot and dry. But like, I think our artificial conditions are more xeric, more arid than even a lot of deserts because there's not a lot anyway of like humidity cycles, and I think that humidity cycles are a big deal. And I think it's like so easy to just make beef jerky out of a lizard in a closed system if you're not being careful. And I think a lot of people do it. Like if you talk to a vet and you say, okay, of all the chameleons you've seen, what's been the thing that's been wrong with them? And it's like kidney disease. They're all dehydrated, every one of them. Like everyone that goes into a vet is dehydrated. And it's just because they underestimate the hydration needs of captive animals because this isn't nature, right? Not if you're outside, you can get around some of this stuff, but like if you're inside, it's so very different from the wild. And I think hydration is just such a big thing to pay attention to. So hydration and quality of water, nutrition. If you're feeding insects, then those insects better be getting a good varied diet. Like my wife made this funny meme the other week about like, going through the grocery store and it's like, oh my God, you guys eat really healthy. And it's like every single thing that's on the conveyor belt is for my animals. And it's not even for the animals that I keep and breed. It's for their food. It's for their insects. Like kale and escarole and dandelion greens and endive and like, organic yams and like crap, like, all sorts of stuff. And then like
Yeah.
I'll go out like harvesting dandelion leaves and flowers and, stuff like that. It's just like, no, I kind of eat healthy, but not as healthy as my crickets do.
Yeah.
I
That's
had
awesome.
this exact conversation last week at the checkout line at the grocery store. You
Yeah.
actually
it's
eat
like,
all this stuff?
Yeah. It's every,
yeah, because
yeah, go ahead.
no, I just say like literally like last week the checkout person was like, "What are these?" I'm like, "They're dandelion greens," and she's like, "What do
Yeah.
you do with those?" I'm like, "Well, I feed them to animals. Some people eat them. I don't eat them. I don't think they taste very good, but some people like
Yeah.
them."
They're pretty bitter.
That's
They're
the
real
exact same item that attracted attention when I was at the checkout line.
Yeah,
always the
yeah.
dandelion, man. I had a lot of people ask, "Do you have rabbits?" Uh,
Oh yeah.
no, pretty close,
Uh,
just no fur. So
let's say that I do.
yeah.
Mixed
Sometimes
a
it's easy.
dinosaur with a rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little easier just to be like, yeah, man, I got like 4 or 5 flop
Yep.
here. What do you want from me?
Yep. Exactly. It is.
So you touched on this a little bit, Frank, but can you talk about other ways that you have to, because okay, so let me see if I can prime this a little bit better. So one of the shows we had was with Armin Kulian of Herp Time, right?
Yeah, I listened to that one. Great one.
Yeah, really good, really great guy. And he was talking about how it's easier to keep 100 animals
Mm,
with the same requirements than it is to keep
yeah.
10 animals with disparate requirements. So you mentioned keeping your more
Yep.
cool temperature species at lower levels, high temperature species at
Mhm.
higher levels in the room. What are other considerations and adjustments that you have to make for that reason?
Sure. Yeah, and I remember that very line, and that really resonated with me as well. I was just like, my God, yeah, that's such a insightful and concise way of saying something that's quite complicated.
Oh
And I
yeah.
was just like,
Yeah.
wow, well, way to distill that. Like, that's so awesome. And I was just like, wow, what a great statement. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, absolutely. I do have, I should have said earlier of like, one of the other things that I consider when I'm going to work with the species or not is like, will it fit into my room?
Yeah.
Right. My room, I never let get super hot. So like I would have to do a fair amount of work to do uromastics well in my room, right? For instance, right? Like I could probably do it, but it would be a stretch. It would be difficult. It would take a little bit of gymnastics. So I do take into consideration like what's going to fit well into my room, because while I do offer different conditions in my different terrariums, I do cool and heat my room, by the seasons. Like it's much warmer in the summer
Yeah.
and much cooler in the winter. And the daytime temperature may not vary too much, but the nighttime temperature varies a lot
Yeah.
in my room from the winter to the summer. So, for instance, I recently passed up working with a species that I really wanted to, that I thought was very cool, and I had a good opportunity to get some, but they're like tropical, like equatorial tropical. And like I get my reptile room down to 55 degrees in the winter, right?
Yeah.
On a lot of nights. And that's just simply too cool for them. A lot of the stuff that I work with, like that's good for them they want that cool down. I have a lot of Australian stuff. I have a lot of Madagascan stuff, right? That those things want that cool winter to drop down and to recharge and to rest and so forth. So it does have to fit into that, into that consideration. And it really does, it is so much easier to take care of animals with similar requirements. So for instance, like I've kept and bred northern blue-tongued skinks for longer than any other species that I've kept and bred, like pushing 30 years at this point. And I love them. I think they're wonderful animals, but I've reduced my collection of them down by 2/3, right? So I had like, let's say about 30 breeders, and now I have 10. And I'm not going to go past 10. I'm going to keep 10 because I love them so much, but I'm not going to do any more than that for two reasons. One, because they're a bigger species and I really care to work with. I don't feel like I have no problem with admitting and saying that they don't get the same quality of care that my Williamsi do. They just don't, because of the space, right? So, and because of the fact that their shits are so big. You know what I mean? Like a Williamsi, like they poop, it falls down to the ground, it grows plants, and I literally never have to clean the enclosure. And it smells like the forest. It smells wonderful inside their terrariums. Yeah. And it's with the automatic misting system and the automatic light timers, it's practically no work. I feed them. I feed them and I collect eggs, and that's all I do. And it takes no time. Blue tongue skinks, like giant turds that they smear everywhere, you know, that like you would have to have a very large enclosure to do it bioactive correctly. And, you know, just frankly, more space than I have. So anyway, like that's a species where I'm not going to be able to, I can't fully walk away from, because I do like them so much, but I've greatly reduced the number that I'm keeping and the number that I'm going to breed and produce. And those enclosures are going to be filled up with different species of Lacerta, you know, jeweled Lacertas, and then some other ones too that are even smaller than jeweled Lacertas that I think have a ton of potential in the hobby. And just, you know, kind of phasing away from that for those reasons.
Yeah, it's such a crazy, you know, I can really resonate deeply with needing anything that you bring in to fit with your environment, because the peak temperature here in the summertime, I mean, it's like it's ambient temperature in the middle of June, July is like, it's like 100 degrees in here, you know, like even with the air you know, the air kicking the fans on, and you know, the Euros and the Xenogama love it. They're happy campers. Yeah, maybe the Xenogama don't need the same peak temperatures. So, you know, in the middle of the heat of the summer, I'll clip off all the heat lights. But they're great. Yeah. They're great. This is just as good by me. They don't mind it. But it is so hard to find other animals that tolerate the extreme here.
Oh my God.
And then you know, you top that off with something that I have a preference for, a penchant for, is herbivores. Now, obviously the Xenogama don't fit that bill, right? But I really, really like herbivores because it's just a maintenance concern. It's you know, for me, I've kept lots of stuff that are insectivores and carnivores, and that's fun too. But it's like, at the end of the day, unless it's the main focus of what I do, it is such a massive cost. Like, you know, I was keeping, Ackies for a while, and I no longer have them, and that was purely a cost concern. It's like, you know, the amount of money I spent on 5 animals just to keep them fed and to keep them from biting, you know, killing each other or whatever.
Yeah, they're dumpsters, man. They eat so much.
Yeah, and people think, oh, your grocery greens bill must be insane, and it's like, well, it's a lot, but for the number of euros I have, you'd be surprised how few greens I actually buy. You know, it can be such a nightmare to make those adjustments. And so are there animals, like, can you give us an example of something else that you've had to say, no more, I can't, this species, I can't do it anymore, and maybe why?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of kind of amazing species that would, you know, probably be considered bucket list species, but like that I walked away from simply because I didn't see a major future for them with me in terms of like breeding, in terms of the business, like smog, you know, the sun gazers, and Borneo earless monitors, and fly river turtles. Like, you know, like I had all that stuff, but it's just like, at the end of the day, like they're awesome, but like, you know, is a sun gazer actually cooler than a lot of other lizards? No, it's not. Like I've had them in my house. They're awesome, but like, is it like objectively a better animal, like just because it's so rare? So like, that's one thing that's shifted for me, is like, I did for a while, I was just like, keep stuff because it's rare, because it's cool and it's awesome. You know, I don't do that anymore. I feel like I've grown up a little bit there. You know, I'm not just going to keep something just for rarity's sake, which I was doing for a little bit of time. But I'm trying to think if there's any other species that just didn't quite fit for me. You know, I can't. Panther chameleons was one. I was breeding them for a while, but that shifted for a couple of reasons. One, for the marketplace is pretty well flooded. It was getting, you know, like everybody and their brother was breeding and selling Panther chameleons, and they're so much larger, like compared to the species like carpet chameleons and lesser chameleons that I'm keeping now. Like they're like 5, 6, 10 times the weight of them, you
Yeah.
know, and requiring commensurate enclosure space and food, like the amount of food that they would take, you know. So like those things, you know, like again, like I love panther comedians. They're, you know, they're unbelievably gorgeous animals, you know. It's like, you know, Uromastyx up in the trees, you know, that,
Yeah.
you know, that like that level of color. But you know, just like with Uromastyx, you know, require a large amount of space. And like for me, that just wasn't something that was feasible long term. I know that there's other ones, but I can't, if I think of any, I'll say it. But I know that there's been other ones where I had them and I was just like, you know what, that's not quite for me. But I do like to, that's like kind of my MO, honestly, is like I'll get a pair or two of something that I think is cool, that I like. And sometimes it's just like, you know what, it's not for me. And then I just move on from it. Emerald tree skinks
Oh yeah.
is one. I like, you know, it's like I had like this fascination with them for like going back 30 years, like in the old TFH skink book. And I saw them in there and I read the little blurb on them. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. It's like a skink, you know, it's very active and moving around like a bird and intelligent and, you know, like God, that sounds so great. And then I kept them and I didn't really, and I bred them and I did well with them. I, you know, produced a handful of babies and the demand was real high, but like, they just didn't do it for me. Like they're very flighty. Like it was just like people say about like Williamsi and other day geckos being flighty and stuff, but like I can go into these enclosures and, you know, 99 out of 100 times they won't escape and they won't spaz out.
Yeah.
It's like every time I worked in the enclosure, those tree skinks just spazzed out, like just flew and smashed themselves. And it's just like, oh, I don't like this at all. Like this isn't fun.
Yeah, it's
Like
stressful.
as long as I don't, yeah, it's stressful for them. It's stressful for me. You know, like the Williamsi, as quick as they are, and as long as I don't try to grab them, they just kind of watch me as I give them food and you know, wipe up the walls a little bit. Like they don't care 99% of the time. But like with that particular species, like they're just like, it's too flighty for me. And I need to be able to see something. I need to be able to interact with it, even if it's at night. Like I have a good amount of nocturnal species. So like I don't see them much during the day, but if I go around with my flashlight at night, I can see them moving around, like the leaf-tailed geckos and my knobtail gecko. You know, knobtails you never see during the day, but you go around at night and they're super active and interesting. And like the leaf-tails especially, I'm like, God, they're so active at night. As long as you don't mind observing them at night, they're an incredible species. It'd be great pets for night owl.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's such striking little lizards too.
Yeah, indeed.
Oh, they're awesome. I'm getting into them more and more species.
Yeah, they're amazing. It's pretty unforgettable the first time you see like a satanic leaf tail or,
yeah,
you know, they're just like,
for sure.
How is that real?
Yeah, they're unbelievable.
Indeed.
So kind of on a similar but different line of thinking with that last question, I'm curious on a broader scale in herpetoculture, if there are any particular species that have kind of disappeared from herpetoculture that you miss or would like to see, and or if there are any particular species that are out there but that you think are just underrepresented that you'd like to see more of.
Trying to think of any that I think that have kind of disappeared that deserve not to have, and that really have, I can't. There's a lot of like weird obscure stuff like chameleons especially that, you know, were a bit more common, but it's like it's so hard
usually
with
they
stuff
disappear
like that
for a reason.
That's exactly correct. And that kind of brings me back to, I meant to mention this before when I talk about like what species do I want to work with. So I also don't want to work with a species that is so delicate and whose care is so specific that only I can do it. You know what I mean? Like, or like only a very high level keeper, you know, of course, not just me, but like that only somebody with tons of experience can do, right? That is a no-go for me. That might be like, I might keep one pair of those for my own personal enjoyment, but like in terms of like working with multiple pairs to try to put out there, if it's so delicate that someone else can't keep it alive, then what's the point? Then why put a ton of them out there? And unfortunately, a lot of chameleons fall into that niche. Unless it should, there are plenty of chameleon species that I wish I could still work with that are not really available, but quite frankly, the vast majority of people wouldn't be successful breeding, if not even keeping. So exactly like you said, quite often species that were common in herpetoculture tend to disappear. And they tend to disappear for a good reason. Some people may not agree with that, but I do think that that's very true. But in terms of underrepresentation, like underrated species, two, genera come to mind: Lacerta and Anolis. Right. Those are two genera, excuse me, that are very diverse and have tremendous potential in the pet industry, because for the most part, the animals, the species in those genera are relatively small, and like they're all hardy. Like Lacertas are bulletproof, Anoles are bulletproof. Like if green Anoles, like the wild caught put through the ringer and treated terribly, will still live for years. Give them proper care, and they'll be one of the most beautiful animals that you've ever seen, and with amazing displays and so forth, and live for years and years. So those are the two genera that I'm very passionate about, and deserve to be more represented in the hobby. So like I follow Armin pretty closely, and like I hopped right on that episode when it was published, and because he's doing obviously incredible work educating the public about how awesome the Anoles are, right? And so that's pretty great, and and I think that there's a lot of potential there. I've worked with a handful of Anoles. I worked with a handful of Anole species. Some of the smaller ones I've moved on from, because I felt they were like a bit too flighty for me, a little too shy for me. But some of the bigger species, or some of the medium species, are not shy at all. And I keep the blue beauty ones, the Anolis equestris podior, are just like, my God, they're like one of the best pet lizards there is. If you don't mind not handling them, they're one of the best. They're one of the best pet lizards there are, because they don't want to be handled. But they're not flighty, they're not skittish, they're very stable animals. You could work right next to them, you could stare them right in the face, and they'll just be like, what do you want? I'll put your hand in there. Well, they don't go run and hide, either.
So I think that what, dude?
Yeah, seriously. And if you don't, I'll bite you. And if you did, I still might bite you anyway. But I'll be beautiful when I do it. So I think that there's tons of potential there for lots of Anole species. And then for me, Lacertas. So I really I've increased my production of jeweled Lacertas every year. Quite frankly, jeweled Lacertas are a better pet than bearded dragons. And there's no way to cut that any other way. They just are. And just bearded dragons are more prolific, which is like, but not by a lot, because jeweled Lacertas are super prolific, man. Like I can get, like if Bert Langerwerf, like, the man, the myth, the legend, like he could get at maximum 7 clutches out of his jeweled Lacertas back in the day. I know.
Wow.
I've gone 4. I've gone 4 inside in Pennsylvania, so I'm pretty happy about that. Nobody's Bert, but I did pretty good. But
so like attainable goals here.
Exactly, correct. And let's just get in the same ballpark here. There's no way. It's like you're not out batting Babe Ruth, but if you can, like, not embarrass yourself standing next to him, that'd be great. But yeah, so anyways, like they'll lay like 40, 50 eggs a year, a female, no problem. It's at least at peak production, of course. But like, so anyway, I think that they're a better pet all over than a bearded dragon. And then there are other species, which I'm starting to get into more and more, which I'm not expert in at all, but I want to become experienced in that same genus, or like the related genera, like around Lacerta, because there's like, what are some of the other ones? Like Podarcis and a few others like that are Lacertas, but not in the Lacerta genus. And I just think that there's a ton of potential there, because they're small. They're a lot of times very colorful, extremely intelligent, and like bulletproof. They live in Europe. Like they experience every condition known to man. Like, oh, it's 110 degrees. Okay. Oh, it's 20 degrees. Okay. Like they can deal with all that stuff under the right situations. And I think they're great. There's a lot of potential there.
I really like those I'm probably gonna mispronounce the name, but the Galatea, the canary.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Those are ones I really like for the similar reasons. They resemble Lacertus to me, you know. I
They
don't know.
are Lacertus.
They are
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. It's a little.
Yeah. Like Lacertidae is like a family, right? And then like
Yeah.
there's, cluster of different genera under that. But yeah, so it's not Lacertidae like as a whole family, and the Galatea, or however you pronounce it, I don't know. But like some of those are awesome. Some of those are like big monsters.
Huge.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
really
But
big.
some of them are like, yeah, like some like will have like heads like, like almost like a tegu size. Like they're nuts.
Yeah.
Like Steleni, I think, is the big one.
Yes.
But like
Yeah.
then there's the one that I really want to try one day, which I hear they're kind of a pain in the butt, so it probably won't like work, but like I want to try. Gosh, I forget them with the species name, but they're jet black with bright blue ocelli spots on them.
Stroudi, or it's
What
it's like starts with an E, right? Like a Stroudi, or it's something like that.
it's like, yeah, it's like Eisentraudi maybe. Then like
Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
yeah, the pictures are just nuts.
Yeah, those
so
are
yeah,
great.
I'd love to try those. They're super rare. I'd like to get some to give. I hear that they're a pain in the butt. Like they're a bit more shy and aggressive than some of the other species. So they might not be the best like candidate species, but I think they're worth a shot. But there are a couple other species that I think do have the right characteristics to be good candidates for the hobby and industry.
Definitely. So you have such a diversity of things that you're doing, not just with the reptiles, but you're a teacher as well, correct? That's
Yeah, I am.
Mhm.
And then you're working with Leap, and you're working with Happy Dragons. With all that said, what are some of the ways that you maintain a work-life balance? Do you ever get overwhelmed with all the things that you have going on?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I get overwhelmed a lot. All the time. I have all sorts of stress management techniques, some of which are not healthy and some of which are healthy. And I've gotten pretty good. Yeah, I've gotten pretty good about as I'm getting older, phasing out the unhealthy stress management things that I've done. But a lot of it is, I gave a lot of credit to my mom, and I'm gonna be, going the other way and saying like now I have so much credit given to my wife, because my wife now works full time for the business.
Oh wow.
That's her full-time job. She stays at home when I teach, and she takes care of the animals. So in terms of feeding and cleaning, like 95% of that is her.
Wow.
Breeding and all like setting up terrariums and stuff like that, that's still all me. And obviously like I direct her, and I've had and kind of educate her, because she was not a reptile keeper before this. Right. And she wasn't like, she was never like against it or anything like that. But then like the more she was with me, the longer we've been together over 10 years now, the more she really liked it. And then it got to a point where the business was getting bigger and bigger, and she was like working a job that she didn't like, that she wasn't making a lot of money. And she was like, well, why am I doing this? Why work for something and someone that I don't like and don't care about for, not great compensation? I just stay home and work for us. And so when that shifted, that allowed things to really kick into high gear, because then it wasn't just me, then it was the both of us. But yeah, it's it takes a lot of balancing. Like I have a lot of balls in the air, and I don't do as much with my educational stuff in terms of like YouTube and things like that as I would like. I don't write as many articles I used to, just because I have so much going on. I'd like to be able to do more with Leap than I have in the past couple of months. It's just it's so hard, being like with being a teacher, and I teach inner city middle school, so it's like no joke. I come home at the end of the day, I work from 7 to 3, every day. And then like by 3 o'clock, I'm zapped, and I come home and crash for a little bit, and, and then do all the animal stuff for a couple hours. And, if I'll have a meeting to get on to for a consultancy or something like that, but it takes a lot of balance. It takes a lot of, sometimes just not kind of letting some stuff go. Like, you know, I would like to do more here, but I can't. So I just take a little step back, and that's okay. But like, if it wasn't for my wife who worked for the business full time, like this could not exist, physically not possible. All right. You know what, you know, it might look like from the outside, it might look like it's all me, it's me doing all these things, but it's not me doing all these things. I'm doing a lot, but so is my wife. And if it wasn't for that partnership, I wouldn't be able to do the stuff I do with Leap. I wouldn't be able to do the stuff I do with Happy Dragons. My collection of animals and business would not even be close to the size it is. Just couldn't be done. Because there was like a year when I was doing all of it. It was pre-Leap, but I was still like doing some stuff with Happy Dragons, and that was a year where the collection was getting quite large. And I was just getting up really early in the morning, and before, like, I go to work, I show up at work at 7 a.m. and I would have done an hour to an hour and a half worth of animal care before I even left for the day.
Yeah.
And then would come home and then do another hour, an hour and a half. And it got to a point where it was just untenable. You know, it just wasn't going to continue anymore. And that's luckily, you know, about the time we realized, like, you know what, like, because then I just started to lean on her, like, hey, can you do this for me? Can you spray these animals down? Can you, like, you know, throw food in this one? And then it just kind of like snowballed from there. Then eventually it was just like, and it took a while because, like, again, she's never kept reptiles before. So it took a while to train her on this stuff, because I'm not, you know, for the most part, I'm not dealing with animals that are they're not ball pythons, right? You can't put them in a drawer and with a bowl of water and walk away for 2-3 weeks. That's not the type of animals that I keep. And so it took a while, but then eventually she learned it, and she learned it really well. And now, like, for the most part, like, I give her direction a little bit at, you know, daily, but like, for the most part, she just does it. I have a list, like, behind me there, we have a checklist. Monday we do that. Monday we do these things. Tuesday we do these things. Wednesday, and she goes through and she checks them off. You know, if she had a super busy day, whatever, because we have a kid as well, and, you know, she runs the house on top of all that. If there's something that she didn't get to, she's like, hey, check the list. I didn't do X, Y, Z. And then I'll go through when I come home, and I'll, you know, clean up, I'll do the rest of it. But, you know, having a schedule, like, I live off of, I have obviously Google Calendar, but then I also have a separate app that's like my notes reminders app, like on the iPhone. It's like I have different ones: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I put my stuff in there, and like I just live off of that checklist, because if I don't do that, something's going to get dropped or whatever. So it's just finding ways to be as organized and efficient as possible is key to doing all of it. And, you know, and just I don't do all of the things that I would like to do in the industry and in my business that I would like to do. I'd like to be able to do more, but there's just not enough hours in the day. And so, and I don't, you know, I've toyed with the idea of like walking away from teaching, but there's, I don't know, we'll see. The stability of that, you know, being, you know, having a family to take care of, you know, like that has to be taken into consideration. So maybe one day the business will get big enough where I'll be able to maybe walk away from teaching. I've been a teacher for 16 years now, high school biology for 11 years. And now my family and I moved. It's 7th grade life science, but I love teaching. I've always loved it. It's a great career. And the fact that I do have, you know, summers off, and good vacations in fall and winter, you know, around those breaks, like that helps. Like if it wasn't for those, I couldn't do what I do, for instance, if I worked a 9 to 5 where I only got 2 weeks of vacation a year. Like I can't imagine doing that, because like so much of the summer, and, you know, like reptile people, like summer's our busy season. We got a ton of babies at that time. So it really works out quite well, actually, because in the summers I'm off, and then we're flooded with blue tongues, baby jewel lacertas, baby chameleons, baby geckos. That's when, you know, we have so many of the babies that need to be raised up and new homes found. So it works out pretty well. It's a good career that balances with what I'm doing.
Yeah, it sounds pretty harmonious. That's really cool. I mean, I think you and I have a lot in common in that regard, because I've been doing jujitsu as long as you've been teaching, and I've been teaching jujitsu now for 10-ish years. and jujitsu works quite well with the reptiles as well. Even though we don't get summers off, the training, each class is only an hour, hour and a half, you know?
Mhm.
Right.
So you have like a 6 a.m. slot. Some days I teach a noon class, other days I teach an evening class. And so I either have a big gap in the middle between, or I have, like it's kind of front loaded in the day, and then the rest of the day is open and available to do what I've got to do. But
Nice.
it's similar reasons, it provides a certain level of stability, things along those lines. So it's really nice. It's cool to see other people doing so much, because it could be it's a lot. It's so much work and time and mental energy. But
Mhm.
there's this other thing that I've noticed that's kind of cool too, which is, at least for me personally, I tend to be a little obsessive, just a little bit. And so I could be here all day, every day, and I'll get in this in my head. I'll be like, I've got to be here. And then something will happen where maybe my fiance and I will take a vacation, like a weekend. We'll go up into the mountains for a weekend or something, and I'll have my little brother or somebody watch the reptiles. And we'll come back after, say, three days or so away. And I'll come in and I'll look around at everything, and I'll be like, damn, maybe I should go away more often. Sometimes it's better. You know what I mean? It's like every once in a while, the stuff
Yeah.
you just don't need to be here all the time. It's probably good for you.
Yeah, no, I think we're in the same boat. Like, OCD runs through our family, like, and not like the kind of OCD that people like, oh, I pay attention to details, so I have OCD, but like the real deal OCD runs through our family, and I definitely have a touch of it. And that's one of those things that drives my wife nuts to no end. Is like I am obsessive. I'm obsessive about details.
Yeah.
Like, I am very detail oriented, and I have extremely high standards, and I hold that to myself, but to everyone around me. And it's like, and a lot of the times it's too high, for sure. And it's just like I go away for a couple of days, which is hard to do with so many things going on. But like, when you come back, everything's fine.
Yeah.
The animals are fine. Like, reptiles, one of the, I've had this conversation before with other reptile keepers, is there's the benefit to having a larger reptile collection. So there is actually an animal husbandry benefit to having a larger collection of reptiles that is often overlooked. And it's that the larger amount of reptiles that you have, the more you're going to leave them alone on an individual basis. The less times that your hands are going to be in their enclosures and touching them and messing with their life. Totally. Reptiles, like, give them the environmental conditions that they need and leave them the heck alone. Stop touching them, stop picking them up, stop getting, looking at them, like, getting close, like stuff like that. Like, that's a big benefit. Like, you see, like, the more you have of the species, the less you're working with them on an individual basis and babying them and like, oh, is everything okay? And the more you just kind of just leave them alone, the better they do. Like, that's one of the big things about reptiles that a lot of people might not want to hear is get your hands off them, just leave them alone, observe them, but even like when I say observe them, like, I'm not going to stand here for 2 hours in front of one enclosure and stare at these animals. Like, I feel like that's going to cause negative stuff too. But like, you look at them a couple times a day, but where the knowledge builds in is like, you're looking at them briefly for a couple times a day, but it's every day. It's for years. And that stuff builds up over time. And that's how you learn an animal. But yeah, just, get your hands off of them, and they tend to do better.
Yeah. I do this a lot on the show and just in my day-to-day life. And I think sometimes it irritates people, but I make a lot of comparisons to jujitsu. So, that it's like herpetoculture, right? It's highly technical. There's a lot of sort of foundational concepts and knowledge that you need. But then at a certain point, we talk a lot about, getting out of your own way, like at the end of the day, people will say, it's like, oh, it's amazing what you do with Euros or whatever. And it's like, dude, I don't do a damn thing. I just put greens in the cage. Yep. It's like they do everything. I don't do shit. Yep. Like, obviously I do some things, but it's at the end of the day, they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones pulling the weight. You're just kind of like setting it in motion. You're just like hitting that little domino, you know. And,
Yeah, exactly. So like as reptile keepers, like you set them up for success. You build the domino tower, and then all you got to do is just touch it, and like you said, and just walk away.
yeah,
And let it
Yeah.
happen. Like the work is all front loaded. If you're doing it right, the work is all front loaded, and then you can just kind of, like you said, just throw greens in. I just throw crickets in or
yeah,
other insects, right? But
Yeah.
instead of greens, but it's the same concept. Like I don't do anything. I just give them their food. They have automatic watering. They have automatic lights. In mate, there's like the old expression in reef keeping, to make a tank maintenance free requires constant maintenance, and kind of like, and it's like this,
Yeah.
like, ironic and paradoxical thing, but it's like anyone that's kept reef aquariums or it's like worked with reptiles, like will probably laugh at that because like, oh my God, if that isn't the truth.
Yeah.
Little things here and there that you have to pay attention to, but then it kind of takes care of itself as long as you're kind of just there, making sure the little things are okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's occasionally I'll get messages from folks who want to know like what's the average gram weight on like a 2-year-old? I'm like, bro, I haven't
Yeah.
the slightest clue.
Yep.
And like, just
Yep.
that is like, you need to get out of your own way. You're pushing way too hard on this particular thing. I mean, like,
Yep.
don't get me wrong. I love nitty gritty. I love minutia.
Yeah.
Because it's again the same thing with jujitsu. Sometimes those details really matter, and I feel like with the Euros, sometimes there are specific details that really matter. But it's not how much the damn thing weighs when it's 2 years
It's
old.
not weight, that much I can
Right.
tell you. It's
Yeah.
not weight.
Yeah, it's not their weight at
Yeah.
all. Did you keep reef tanks? Is that something in a part of your past or present?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've done everything, but like, yeah, I had reef tanks for a little bit, and I had a really nice one. So like my old house, I built a very large closet in my living room, and I made an in-wall tank. So it was a 125 gallon in-wall, and I made a just beautiful reef tank. And it was like it was an Aquarius room back there. So I had like the big, 6x2x2 tank, and then underneath it, a 55 gallon sump. And then I had multiple other tanks connected to it, like including like an octopus tank, which was fucking awesome. Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, exactly. I knew you guys would like that. But all that stuff like connected in line. I like to tinker and build shit. So like I had a wave tank, like this thing that filled up this 5-gallon bucket, and it was like almost like a toilet flush mechanism that dropped all this water. Like I literally built a surge tank because I'm insane for no reason, just because I thought it would be cool.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if there's anything about that, about building and maintaining a reef tank that informed your herpetoculture practice.
I don't know. Maybe I'd say maybe more the other way around, honestly.
Okay.
Looking at living organisms on a large scale in a systems based, like all connected. Like I'm a biology teacher. That's what my degree's in. Organisms exist as a community, not in a vacuum, right? And that's so reef keeping, and
right.
It's before it was called bioactive, it was called naturalistic, and a lot of us guys that have been around for 20-30 years have been doing that for a long time, especially like lizard guys or dart frog guys. I was really big into dart frogs for a while. Like you understand like the nitrogen cycle, and stuff like that, and how plants and animals are connected, and how in a semi-closed system you can create something pretty harmonious. And I did that with dart frogs before I did that with reef tanks. So I would say honestly the other way around. But then I built this like wonderful system, and I had it set up for years, and I was really happy with it. I kept some pretty difficult to take care of fish. Like I had Achilles tangs, and like I said, I had octopus connected in that system, and it was wonderful. I loved it. It was quite a display piece. But then quite frankly, I got bored with it. One of the things that I discovered about myself over the past 10 years is that I will lose interest unless I'm breeding the species multi-generationally.
Mm.
I can't, I'm for whatever reason, you know, good or bad, whatever you think, I've gone past the point like where I almost never keep reptiles as pets anymore. I tend to, even if I really like the species, I will lose interest and want to move on unless I'm breeding it, unless I'm producing multiple generations of it. I don't know why. I don't know if I can give you a good answer for why, because I often think about it myself. But unless it's something that I'm breeding every year, then I tend to lose interest. And that is such an integral part of what I'm doing. Even if it wasn't a business, that's the truth for me anyway.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Right. That's interesting.
Really.
Yeah, I relate to that on some level. I think that the stuff that I'm producing definitely seems to like drive a different kind of momentum for me. I'm realizing even at like, you know, my stage on the journey of herpetoculture is, you know, much earlier on, but it's something I'm already noticing. One
Momentum is
question
the
I
right
had-
word, I think. I think
Yeah.
momentum, that's a very good word used to describe it. And another word that popped into my head is fulfillment. Like
Yeah,
there's a much
exactly.
greater momentum and fulfillment of whatever it is inside of us that drives us to be, you know, herpetoculturists, you know, like, you know, it's culturing, right? It's the culturing of reptiles. It's breeding. It's not keeping of reptiles. I mean, we call it that sometimes, but it's herpetoculture.
Yeah.
We're producing them, we're culturing them. So like, I think that's part of it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally relate to that. One thing that I'm curious about, just like on the whole systems and routines and rhythms piece, you spoke earlier to the seasonal variance being so important. And I'm curious if that is like, if you have it systematized to that level, like for example, yeah. So do you have like a weekly calendar, like, or an annual calendar that you're following, or is it
so
more
maybe
based on
not as
cues?
So it's I break it apart seasonally. And I don't necessarily follow like a set, like on October 1st I do this. I don't do that. Like Phil, like I take great pride, and I take especially great pride in pissing people off and telling them that I don't weigh anything, and I don't measure humidity. I don't measure humidity, and I don't measure temperature. I don't measure any of it.
Phil and I just had this conversation the other day.
Yeah. And I take a sick pride in telling that to people, and it's such a jerk thing. But like, because I understand, I truly do understand where people are coming from with that, especially people that are beginning. They want guidelines to go by.
Totally.
And like, I don't like, and I used to want those guidelines too, and I get it. So I totally get it, but I threw those out a long time ago because I look at the animal, I look at the system that it's living in. You know, I don't look at numbers. Numbers don't mean anything. Somebody commented on my one video that I made on YouTube about like banana spiny tail iguanas, and he like chastised me for, well, according to the German state publication requirements, you have to have X watts per square foot above your banana pectinata enclosure. And I'm like, that is one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard, you know, because like there's so many considerations that take into account how many watts you put above an animal's enclosure. The variables involved there is as long as my arm. And like, you're trying to say it has to be this number of watts per square foot. That's absurd. So stuff like that, like you know, try to tell people like there is no right answer. There is no number. There's no number. There's a bunch of numbers, but there's no number. Right. So like, I can't tell you, you know, things like that. But anyway, sidetrack, go back to your original question. So I don't have set things like details like that, but in general, this is what I do. In the summer, the lights are on for 14 hours a day. In the winter, they're on for 8 to 10 hours a day. In the spring and in the fall, they're on for 12 hours a day. That's what I do.
Cool.
Right. And then the temperatures swing as well. Right. So for the most part, in the summer, ambient temps in my room, high 70s. In a lot of the enclosures, maybe slightly more than that. The lower enclosure is less than that, higher enclosure is more than that. in the winter, the ambient temp in here during the day is about 70, and it'll get down to 55 to 60 at night. And that induces, if not hibernation or brumation, at the very least a rest period for a lot of my reptiles that I keep, and slows them down and is a nice little break for everyone involved. So that's what I do. And I also will vary, I vary my humidity and rainfall during that time too, because everything's on automatic misters. So during the summer, I mist and rain a lot more than I do in the winter. So everything cools down and dries down. I don't stop misting, but I definitely mist less. So it's cooler and drier in the winter, and it's warmer and wetter in the summer. That's kind of how it is in nature. And I also try to follow daily humidity cycles as well. As I'm sure it's much more humid at night than it is during the day because of the temperature humidity relationship. So like I tend to do my rainfall like an hour to a half hour before lights out, and then like a half hour or so after the lights go on. And a lot of times I'll water in the middle of the night. Yeah. And sometimes I'll just kick it, and again, like I'll just look at my enclosures, like, no, it looks a little dry, kick them on. Let's let it, just do a manual override, let it run for a while. Yeah. And then I also like to do, just to make sure, like, I don't like put my hands in these enclosures very often. Like I said, I don't like to do that, but like I do walk around. I have this big pressurized mister with like a battery pack, Ryobi, pretty awesome thing. Sweet. And I go through and I hand mist things regularly too, because it allows me to tailor exactly how much moisture I want to give these animals, and also just it gives me a good excuse to just, okay, you look good, oh, you maybe need a little extra food or a little less food, and stuff like that. And like a lot of my enclosures, it kind of drives me nuts because like I'm like pretty obsessive about aesthetics, but like we use sticky notes, right? I use like I'll put a sticky note on there, like to my wife at least, like skip a feeding on this animal, it's looking a little round, or I'll put a sticky note on that says double this animal's food for the next week, or stuff like that, to communicate to myself in the future or to my wife. But yeah, those are some of my routines and systems that I have in place.
Cool.
Yeah, I wanted to sorry Rory.
No, go ahead, Phil.
All right. I actually kind of wanted to go back a little bit to what you were saying when we were talking about like not weighing stuff and not really measuring temperature. Yeah. Because there really is, Roy and I've talked about this several times, but there really is something about once you've gotten to a certain point, you really are going by feel in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think that so on my Euro care guide, one of the things I put in there is for a basking zone, I give them a range. I say, you're basically looking like 115 to 130, but rarely over 125. And they'll be like, well, what is it? I'm like, fucking find out. Like literally fuck around. Yeah. Like see what your animal does. If it's sitting on the side, if this is the basking zone and it's sitting over here at the edge of the basking zone, it's hotter than the animal wants, right?
It's too hot. Yeah.
It's too hot. If it's sitting there for an hour and not getting warm enough, then it's too cold. So it's pretty straightforward, but like not every single Euro wants it the same way. Some of them will sit under a 125, 130 basking zone and just love it, soak it all up. Some of them, they don't want to go over 115 and they just don't. They just like, at least most of the time, they don't want to do it. And it's like, it's also a way of like, get out of the idea, excuse me, that there's this metric that you're trying to beat. Like it's really much more responsive and fluid and like interactive than it seems at the outset, I think.
It is. It absolutely is. Like in nature is a range. It's cycles. It's not a thing. Like it's not the way that I try to teach people and educate people about this is like there's not a temperature in Madagascar where these chameleons are found. There's not a temperature. There's a wide range of temperatures. And not only are the temperatures that you're seeing from the weather station, the big range of temperatures, but then think about microclimates. Like in my friggin' reptile room, like at 6 feet tall, those enclosures, they're 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the enclosures that are right on the floor. Like,
Yeah.
like those microclimates just there within 6 foot of height in my basement, is huge, let alone like nature. Like if you go hiking in the woods, you stand in an open patch of sunlight and it can be blazing, and you walk 10 feet the other way and it can be cool and damp, like that's just the way nature is. And, the thing that I always advocate for and I try to push is like, like being a teacher, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's, trying to help people take care of reptiles, is give your, deeply research their natural range as much as you can, and their microclimates, not just their, the forests that they're found in, and their microclimates. Research it as much as you can, try to approximate it, but within that, give them choices. Like the most important thing, I think, in reptile husbandry is to give the animal choices, because they know much better than we ever will what their bodies need. Totally. Right? Give them a variety of food to eat. See, they'll tell you which one they like. They'll tell you which one, is, piques their interest. Give them a range of temperatures. They'll tell you which one they want. You just got to listen. You got to, not really listen. You got to watch. Listen in that way by seeing what they're doing. They'll tell you just behaviorally. They'll tell you how much water they need. Like, are you misting them and they're never drinking, or are you misting them and they're like just dashing for the water and chugging it as much as they can? Stuff like that. Like, is an animal, the animal's underneath its basking spot all day long, like, well, it's not warm enough, you have to increase it. Like, think about it. Do you think an animal, especially a desert animal, you think it's going to sit in the sun all day long? Like, no, it's not going to do that. So like, stuff like that is like those, I try to teach people to read behavior more than numbers, because numbers are a nice starting point, but that's all it is the very, very smallest of starting points, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like another aspect of this too is just the principle of gradients, and understanding how important it is to establish gradients, and then let that inform. Because if you have a gradient, like you're saying, you have a gradient and you're observing your animal, it's telling you everything you need to know.
Exactly.
It's like that simple.
Gradients, it's just another word. It's like just another word for choice. Exactly. Like give the animal a choice in what, like by establishing gradients, temperature gradients, light gradients, humidity gradients. All of those things should exist in every enclosure. And some animals are so hardy that you can get away without having gradients, but it doesn't mean it's like best for them. And a lot of animals aren't that hardy. Exactly. Like, there's levels of survival that are, possible for a lot of species. That doesn't make it, optimal.
And it's so easy to let like the like striving for perfect become the enemy of good. I can count it's probably hundreds of euros over the years that, you put them in an otherwise perfect enclosure in terms of metrics, and they're just not psyched. They're just not into what, there's something about it they're not happy about. And instead of just sort of forcing them to stay in that circumstance, say, no, the book says this is what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that's not really, it's just not like it's just not very effective. It's a sort of like an inefficient way to go about it. So I'm really curious about, actually, I had this question written down. I want to make sure I don't mess up the wording here. Yeah. So there's going to be kind of like a lump of a question. So are there areas of herpetoculture as a whole that you feel are really sorely lacking, or maybe are there areas of herpetoculture that you feel have the most or a lot of potential for innovation, growth, experimentation? And then you could also take that as like, are there maybe blind spots that we have as an industry as a whole?
Okay. So one of the things that I think has always been a major issue with reptiles as pets is I think that for so much of the public and for so many reptile keepers, they're kind of viewed as disposable, as simple, as stupid. And none of those things are true. And and it's just like, it's like the whole, like, back in the day, you buy a baby red eared slider and you throw it in a plastic pond thing, what I mean? Or like you buy a hermit crab at the beach, or a green anole at the beach, or like, oh, it's Junior's first pet, let's go down to the pet store and buy him an iguana and throw it in a 10-gallon tank. And it's just like, oh, it died, it's fine, either like move on to the next thing or get a new one, or just be done with it. And I feel like that's still, like with people like us, it seems like crazy talk.
Yeah.
But I do, if you like really look at the industry as a whole, like look at the Petcos and the PetSmarts and the reptile shows, which far outweigh people like ourselves in terms of quantity, like that's still the pervasive mindset of this like small and simple and stupid and disposable animal. And that's like, reptiles are just so often viewed as so alien and different, and for us, like, that's a good thing and that's an interesting thing. But for some people, it's like that, well, that makes them less than. So I think that's always been such a major problem with the reptile industry. And it's quite frankly why, there are animal rights people that are trying to stop pet keeping. It's, they look at, if you look at some of these reptile shows, or you go to a Petco, and it's hard not to look at that and be like, yeah, no, that's wrong. That is wrong.
Yeah.
That animal's dying, like, and it's being sold to a mom and her son, or like that, here's the chameleon kit that's being manufactured and sold for a chameleon, which is like a death trap for the animal itself.
Yeah.
It's not ideal for that animal in any way, shape, or form. But that's what's being like put out there by like the masses, by like mass pet stores and things like that. So I really think that that's the kind of stuff that straight up just has to go away. Like it just like that then, I am the most pro reptile keeper out there. Like, like I'll sound, like, you're going to have to pry my reptiles out of my cold dead hands. Like, it's not happening. Good luck getting them all. I mean, if they become illegal, like, good luck getting them. Like they're mine. You can't have them. But like at the same time, like, change needs to occur. Like it's not okay to walk around these reptiles and see these, animals being sold for 10, 20, 40 bucks, and they're literally dying. Like you're watching them die, and it's just like, it's heartbreaking. And it's hard, and it's nothing but pure ammunition for animal rights activists that do want pet keeping, especially exotic pet keeping, to come to a halt. That's all that is hurting us. So that stuff needs to go away. One of the things that I've thought a lot about lately, and I'm starting to try to communicate more and more, is this notion of the fact that, so wild-caught, I will preface this by saying, and I will go into more detail in a minute, that wild-caught reptiles have a place in herpetoculture. But what I want to say is that nobody should ever buy a wild-caught reptile as a pet. And I use that word pet specifically, right? Wild-caught reptiles should not be pets. That I don't agree with. Wild-caught reptiles should only be purchased by experienced reptile breeders with the sole specific purpose of propagating that species in captivity for whatever reason. But like, that animal you should never buy. I don't agree with personally. I don't see any, with how established herpetoculture is, with how common captive bred reptiles are. Like, you can walk into like any pet store and get a captive bred reptile of some kind. There's simply, at this point in herpetoculture, there's no reason to buy a wild caught animal as a pet. It's like this flip thing. Unfortunately, you go into reptile shows, and a lot of new people that haven't done a lot of initial research yet. And, these are not the people that I blame, because like, they don't know yet, right? This is new to them. They don't know the difference. They're learning. And so they find the cheapest thing, or, something that looks cool and is affordable, and they buy that, when they see the next table over on my table. So for instance, see a blue tongue skink, a wild caught Halmahara, you know, or Tilaquah gigas from like New Guinea, that's $75. Then you walk down 3 tables to Frank's table, and there's a blue tongue skink for $400.
Yeah.
Why in the earth would he, you know, do that? You know, of course they don't know, you know, that one that's $75 with wild caught is full of parasites and it's going to be dead in 6 months. Not 99 out of 100 times.
Yeah.
And that mine, you know, are bred in captivity, are socialized, have no parasites, will live for 20 to 30 years, and won't cost you any vet bills.
Mhm.
So it's kind of flipped in the industry. Like the cheap wild caught stuff should be purchased by guys like us, by people like us, with the intention of breeding them and establishing that species in captivity. If you know, like think about, and I think like, and I'm quite certain that you guys and Armin talked about this, like the mass importation of Nile monitors, of savanna monitors, and like from like my chameleons back in the day, of Jackson's chameleons and Senegal chameleons, and it's just like thousands upon thousands of these animals being pulled from the wild and not in literally just being sold as disposable items, right?
Mhm.
And then that's God, that's just awful, and that needs to stop. It needs to go away. Like I don't want wild caught reptiles to go away, but I do want how it's done to change, and I don't have all the answers, you know, so and I don't know how to do that, you know, perfectly well. But I do know that it does need to change, and we need to do a better job as an entire industry of promoting only captive bred reptiles as pets. Right? We need to do a better, and I do think that we do kind of say that. I think it feels so much like lip service, though, a lot of the times. I don't feel like enough is done about it. I don't, you know. Man, it's like it's semi-controversial for me to say don't buy a wild caught reptile as a pet, you know, but like there are people that will like take that as negative. But I think that I'd like to have somebody justify that to me in these days where there are so many captive bred reptiles available of many species. There is a surplus of captive bred reptiles in this country. Right. There is enough captive bred reptiles to go around. There doesn't need to be this mass, you know, collection of certain species, and a lot of which are not well suited for captivity. Nile monitors, savanna monitors. The best reptile people in the world can't keep and breed savanna monitors. They're practically an enigma. You know, like, and like think about how many of them, you know, anyway. So I'm starting to ramble a little bit there, but that I think is something that really that needs to change. And I ramble about it a little bit because I am passionate about it and I think about it a little bit, you know, pretty much every day. Now what has room for growth? What I'm seeing, so that's pretty negative talk. Let's be positive now. What I'm seeing on the positive side of things is like the huge amount of growth in terms of like, you know, it's called bioactive now. It's called naturalistic before, and vivariums, right? Or even if it's like desert, like, you know, like still like, you know, like natural looking enclosures, even if there's not live plants in it. But like I see more and more people pushing for larger habitats, more enriching, more naturalistic. I mean, we're never going to get to nature, right? No matter what, we are selfish. We're keeping reptiles, we're keeping animals for our personal enjoyment. There's no getting around that. But like you can do it. We can improve on how we're doing it. So I'm seeing a huge growth in like shift towards that way, right? Do you think, like, you know, we talk about, like, regular discussions are had about the ethics of animal keeping and about how to do so ethically and to the best of our ability. And quite frankly, those conversations weren't had 20 or 30 years ago. I didn't think about it 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know. It wasn't really a thing that was like talked about. And so I see that more and more. And I think that's really exciting. I do see the industry shifting in a positive direction, which is really nice. But it's just like, there's like the numbers of like negative things are so high. And I just think that if we keep pushing education, like via social media, via YouTube, because that's like the only way to do it realistically.
Right.
It is so important, so that we can keep that trend going. Because quite frankly, if we don't change, you know, it's going to get changed for us, and it won't be good. It won't be good at all.
Yeah, really well said. I mean, we definitely have to be the authors of our own future in that regard. It's so challenging because, you know, to what you were saying a minute ago about wild caught reptiles shouldn't be bought as pets. I agree. And I don't think it's terribly controversial. I mean, I know it is, but it doesn't feel controversial.
It
like,
shouldn't be. It
no,
shouldn't
it
be, but
shouldn't
it
be
is.
at all. And
Exactly.
it's so easy because, you know, one thing that's really common in Uromastyx, and I'm sure it's common in other animals as well, is people bring in these imports by the thousands and they say, oh, captive bred. And I'm like, bro, there's not captive bred. There's nothing captive bred about 10,000 baby ornates hitting the United States market at the same time. You know, like it's so easy. There's no accountability there. There's no the burden of proof. Nobody's pushing for it. No one, you know, they just say, oh, we got it from a local breeder. They just kick down the road over and over and over and over again. And it's really, really difficult. So it's been one of my main kind of one of the hills I want to die on is like, no, it's not captive bred. And they I can tell you all the reasons why. Like 99.9% of Euros here right now are wild caught animals. And I mean, that includes my breeders, except for the ones I hatched myself. Most of them are wild caught, and the wild ones are terrible pets. They're awful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't make good pets at all. Like it, even from like our point of view, like, and from like a pet keeper's point of view, like they're not good pets.
No.
You know, like don't even consider the ethical side of things. They suck as pets. You know, like compared to a cat. You know, like a wild caught, like fat tail gecko versus a captive bred leopard gecko. Like one's going to be a great pet, the other one is not. You know, a captive bred equestrus nightingale is going to be an amazing pet. A wild caught nightingale, probably not. You know, like chameleons. Chameleons are like the quintessential example of this. A captive bred chameleon, like a panther chameleon or a carpet chameleon, is hardy. Like they're tough animals, like, but like they just get put through the ringer so badly in the collection and the export and the import process that by the time they get to us, they've just been put through such trauma that they're literally dying. And so yeah, of course they don't do well, but like a captive bred one is like, it's night and day. It's a different animal. It might as well be a different animal in terms of its care requirements.
Totally.
And I find the exact same thing to be true with the Polychrus. It's like, there's no comparison. The captive bred and born babies that have hatched here are just totally bulletproof.
Yeah.
And like you can't, it's so obvious. Like I've seen like wild caught Polychrus like for years, right? And looking at you, the pictures of your babies that you produce, like it's a different animal. It's like it's practically a different species of animal, and it's just because of the process that they go through. So yeah, it's what a difference for so many animals that are, you know, have been considered delicate and difficult to keep and breed for so long. Like it's just like, it's because of, you know, even if they're collected and brought over like pretty well and they come in decent shape, they're still like, they have to like change everything about what they're doing to adapt to captivity. Like, so for instance, Uroplatus, the leaf-tailed geckos. So I have several pairs of them, you know, a good number of pairs. And my best breeders are captive bred animals. The worst breeders are wild caught. They look fine, but they don't breed very well at all. Like, you know, and it's good because like it's good that they do breed some, because then I can get those genetics and then produce more captive bred, and then those will be good breeders. But like, my gosh, the difference in productivity in between my wild caught pairs of Uroplatus and my captive bred, it's night and day.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, definitely. That's all really solid stuff. So Frank, we're creeping up on 2 hours here, so I recognize we've taken a substantial amount of your time. So we've just got kind of two remaining questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, it's
The
great.
the first of the two would be, what does the future hold? What are some of your goals for the future? What's what do you see of the next 10 plus years for living art?
So we talked about this a little bit already. And it might have been before we hit record, so I
Yeah.
can't remember at this point. But I do want to continue to expand, but maybe not necessarily in terms of numbers of animals. Maybe just kind of refining like what species I'm working with. Like for me, it's all about like cornerstone species, that I have like, let's say 10 pairs of, like electric blue geckos and carpet chameleons and jeweled lacertas, and then spear point leaf-tail geckos. But then like I'd like to do now mossy leaf-tail geckos and the Pristoris carteri, the scorpion-tailed geckos, and knob-tail geckos. So I kind of want to like just kind of maybe reduce the sheer diversity and focus on like some, maybe slightly increase the number of cornerstone species that I think are, are underrepresented in the hobby. So I'd like to continue to do that. That's always been kind of my MO, is taking, semi-niche species and making them more visible and more available, because I think that they'd be good fits and good additions to the diversity of herpetoculture. So I want to continue to do that. I want to continue to do educational stuff. I love to write. I make YouTube videos and stuff like that. It's hard just finding the time. That like that stuff is so important to me. Like I want to, be able to continue to help with Leap and give them as much of myself as I can in terms of public stuff, but also like what are ideas for the future and things like that. I'd like to be able to be more involved there, and Happy Dragons, like you guys are getting involved in that. Like again, just like kind of, and it all stems towards like trying to push for simpler and more effective reptile care, like both from a selfish point of view, so that my life is easier as a reptile breeder, but then also from a point of view of trying to educate and help and just spread like that type of reptile keeping. I want to, to get towards more like, let's, look at these animals as complex, wonderful animals, and treat them as such. And we'll get more enjoyment out of it ourselves. Like even if you are only keeping a handful of animals or one reptile as a pet, you're going to get so much more enjoyment out of that animal, so much more enrichment, so much more connection to nature, almost like a reef tank. Like if it's large and it has, like the best technology, and it has a system of components of both living and non-living, that's going to provide you with so much more enjoyment and fulfillment than putting an animal in a 10-gallon aquarium, like stuff like that. So I'd like to promote that as much as possible.
Nice. Awesome. Well, so then I suppose that'll bring us to the closeout question, which is I'm sure you've heard it now if you listen to that one with Armin, but the question is, why herpetoculture? And feel free to take that as sort of broadly or specifically any direction you want to take that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a tough question. So it's like one of those questions where I knew it was coming, and I more or less get asked it all of the time throughout my entire life. Like, why reptiles? And like, as many times as I've been asked it, I still don't have like a great answer. But like the best thing I could maybe say is that for me, it's innate. I don't know. And I know you talked about before about like, maybe there's some sort of genetic component to it from our ancestors, like I remember in that, it might've been with Ron or whoever, one of the episodes I listened to, like with koi farming in your family in the past. And so forth. Like, I wonder if there's, maybe my ancestors were farmers or, were livestock keepers. Like, I don't know, but like, it always has been specifically reptiles. Like I've always loved animals, of all kinds, but it's always been reptiles. And it's been literally my entire life. Like have like very basic memories of being like 3 years old, because I originally was born in Texas and spent every summer there growing up even. And like, just like the herps there obviously are, incredible, but like, it's just, I've always been obsessed with them. And there's never, I don't, think was like an inciting incident or anything like that, other than I find them to be bizarre and diverse and interesting and so different from what we're used to in modern society, that it just, there's no limit to how much they interest me, and there's no good reason for it, like I don't, there's other than I think it has to be innate, but there is, just like there's a connection to the exotic, like to the separateness, like from, like human culture. It's just, reptiles are just, are just so different from us in a lot of ways. And that's just endlessly fascinating. And like the behaviors there and the diversity of forms, it's just cool. Right. I don't know how, I don't understand. Like, I've never understood like how people can be like, not like look at like a Eurymastix or a panther chameleon or something, or a Polychorus, and just be like, man, that's just cool. That's just a neat thing. Like that's as beautiful as a sunset, as as whatever else in nature. It's something that's in nature that's beautiful. And it has to be, it's innate. And I love, there is a lot of like we mentioned before, and when it comes to actually keeping and breeding them, there's just so much fulfillment there. It gives me, it gives me like purpose. It gives me passion. And I don't know where it comes from, but it does supply those things. Like there are days when I'm like, oh God, it's too much. Like there's so much all the time. But then I think about, well, the alternative of not having them, my gosh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
So like it just provides, and then also like the fact that it became a family business that my wife is involved in, that my young daughter is interested in, and hopefully will be a part of one day. So like it's really going from like as a hobby to like a business. It's changed our lives in such a positive way. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of commitment, and there's some stress that goes with that, but man, our lives have really changed over the past 8 years or so because of this, and in a very positive way. So like, man, I just love it. It's a part of who I am, and I'll always do it. I'll always have it in my life.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So just as a little side note, so far my favorite answer was with Phil Tremper. When we asked him, he goes, "It's a disease."
That's funny. I told Roy I was listening to that episode today. I haven't finished it yet, so you just spoiled it.
Damn
for me.
it.
Thanks. Now I know.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But no, what a great answer. That's such a true thing. Like it is a disease. Like you can't help it. It's and it does spread too.
It's contagious, that's for sure. Oh man, that's awesome. Okay,
that's a good one.
Well, that's an excellent way to close the conversation here. Let me hit the stop recording button.